lucky to have today two of our clients and partners who are working with us on Inclusion Insights. Kevin Edwards, who is the Chief Diversity Officer, Diversity and Inclusion Officer at Bechtel. He's been there 21 years, and he is a great partner. And Armani O'Neill, Senior Program Manager for G&A, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Amazon. And she is a great partner and has been a client for many, many years. Why are we here today? We're here because we acknowledge that the future of how we work will affect the future of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Our workplaces are hybridizing over the coming year, and we're going to be juggling a mix of in-person and virtual work, all while needing to remain connected and cohesive and inclusive. So here's the big picture. We're emerging from the pandemic. The hybrid workplace is here to stay. 77% of CEOs say their workforce will be moving toward a hybrid model, a portion working in the office and a portion working from home. 33% of companies total in the US say that they're going to be working remotely post-pandemic. That comes from a survey by Perlmeyer on policies and practices. So with the hybrid world, needing to remain connected and inclusive while delivering learning that is meaningful means we're going to need sustainable and scalable, and we think evergreen solutions to help us broaden our reach and help learners at all levels integrate the mindsets and skills that we're going to need to work in this more volatile environment. We believe the platform that we're working on right now is an example, just an example of what the future will look like. Inclusion Insights, we see as a fabric that weaves together in-person and virtual learning experiences, robust online modules in a digital platform built for integration and application of inclusive leadership skills. The tool is built to flex with the real world and keep you current on trends and creates what we hope is a web of connectivity between the internal change agents, those people who have gone through learning, who want to remain connected and continue to push forward D&I initiatives. Now, we're not saying we have it all right yet, but what we do know is that we're headed in the right direction. The other piece of what's happening now is content and conversations are becoming more conflicted within organizations because they're becoming more conflicted in the larger society. It's more complex to sort this stuff out now. We need some new mindsets in order to meet the increase of polarization and politicalization. And the reality is that DE&I is not the only belief system that is out there competing for mind share today. If you're keeping up with the news, you know that there are different desires, needs, and goals by different communities within our society and around the world. And DE&I does not occupy all of the space today. We're competing for mind share. So we think a digital learning platform is a great part of the solution to manage the hybrid challenge and the more complex social environment that we're operating in. And our vision is to create a responsive knowledge ecosystem that is always present, sending messages, folks coming into the system, courses and modules that live on other folks' learning management systems, that it's flexible and it's again, the cohesive tissue that can keep the initiatives connected in our world today. How did we get here? Our clients came to us a couple of years ago and asked for more follow-up to live and in-person training and they were beginning to recognize that they could not do all of this live and in person. So we started out on a mission just to create follow-up content for our programs. And then that eventually grew to be able to create modules that can be delivered virtually or in person or through independent learning, the ability to develop content rapidly that spoke to real-time learning based on what's going on right now in the society. We expanded into tools that managers could use with their own teams. We expanded into tools that can be pushed directly to learners in their mobile devices. We expanded into being able to provide data about what learners are thinking and experiencing as they experience the modules. And the platform is growing and changing every day. Again, we're in this together, and our vision is new territory. So our session today is an invitation for you to join us on this journey, both today and after the webinar. And we're inviting you to collaborate with us in any way that makes sense for you, given where you are now, and to join us in imagining and building a platform like no other that can meet your needs, because we believe the future is here and it's now. So with that being said, to provide some context, we'd like to jump into a poll. And the poll is to give us a sense and to give everyone who's in our room right now a sense of how you're managing blended learning in your organizations now. So Jenica, you want to give them the instructions and we'll get going on the poll. So Rich, what are you seeing? And Armani and Kevin, also invited to share any observations you have of the poll results.
Well, the first one is really encouraging that 51% of people agree that their DI programs are scalable, which is excellent. That's my first reaction.
So I'm seeing that 42% believe that their organizations prioritize online learning. That's good.
I think one observation that I'm having, and I think I struggled with this when I was answering it as well, is number 3 and 4 around diversity, equity, inclusion becoming even harder to talk about these days. And most people disagreed. And I think that's because we're inviting the conversation more now than I think we probably ever have. But the follow-up to that is number 4, which I see that most people agree with, is that the conversation has gotten much more complex. And 5 just gotten really deep. And so we're talking about it in a more genuine and real way.
Yeah, I think, Mark, the thing I was going to mention was I think the piece about the 4th question that makes it a little bit difficult is we've used the word struggling. I don't, and I think that may be the reason behind the answers or why many people feel like they're struggling. And I think it's just, we're all challenged now to think differently and get out of our comfort spaces. And I think, not that it's a struggle, but it's allowing us to, one, be empathetic and allowing us to be, more vulnerable. And I think a lot of us struggle with that and the ability to really drive this change in our organization. I love that the depth of what we have to work through in DE&I has broadened. I was on a call this a little while ago and celebrating our Be Proud BRG in a program we were having with one of our customers. And going back to the complexity of DE&I, there was a question that came in that said, why do we not have a lot of diversity on the panel? And so what happens is our lens in regards to thinking about diversity gets narrowed when we start thinking about looks. And we had so much diversity on that panel that it was challenging that a lot of people didn't see it. So I had to address the component of looking at diversity in all types of dimensions. We had a transgender colleague on there. We had 2 gay men on there. we had 2 allies, one ally whose daughter came out as gay. Another ally had cultural diversity differences based on working through the world and the challenges we had. So when you think about diversity, it is complex, but you have to broaden the perspective of what diversity means. And I think that has a lot to do why people are struggling, because it takes on continued education and learning, which is what we're trying to drive through the Inclusion Insight platform.
Thank you, Kevin. Armani, you have a comment?
Yeah, I can echo that in my organization as well. We have a lot of goals, particularly surrounding people of color, and we constantly get the question, well, when are we going to shift our focus? And I say, well, we're never going to shift our focus, right? We're going to always broaden and think about diversity holistically, invisible differences. But we're going to, sometimes have goals where we have our greatest opportunities and greatest, areas of need, but we're always thinking about diversity as a whole.
Thanks, Armani. And to add to what Armani and Kevin have said, to build off of it, there are other kinds of differences that are now at play in our society. We don't often talk about them. So, but we feel them. We know they're there. We know they're affecting the sense of even our government. And all of those attitudes and belief systems are now coming into our organizations. And some of our clients are talking about how do we have conversations about what's happening in the larger society, because employees and stakeholders are bringing those topics in. So we created a little piece that was designed to be a conversation starter and make it easier to engage in topics that are real, gritty, and raw right now in the society. So let's watch that. And then you're going to have an opportunity to have a breakout conversation after you watch it.
We live in an identity-rich world that often fragments around conflicting identities. All you have to do is scan the news to see that society is grappling with serious identity-based challenges, many that lead to polarization, incivility, and inequality. And the rules about what goes too far or is inappropriate keep changing every day. Social legacies, social movements, cultural power dynamics, and hot-button identity issues overwhelm community and organizational leaders. Today, leaders need to recognize and deal with identity-based organizational and societal issues and lead during a time of intense polarization, partisanship, and disunity. Today's leaders also need to navigate and manage identity dynamics at work and in the community. But before you can lead, you have to expand your awareness to recognize the context and dynamics fueling the conflicts and crashes you're experiencing. The Social and Organizational Leader Series does just that. It helps leaders deal openly and directly respond to the identity challenges they confront today. Our global society can move ideas, products, and capital across geographic borders in milliseconds, but it has not meaningfully prepared us to move forward in handling our identity differences and the cultural tribes that form around them. Traditionally, society has had a laser-like focus on the impact of identity dimensions like age, geography, gender, race, religion, social class, nationality, and sexual identity. But they don't show us the whole picture. Hidden beneath our demographic and identity dimensions lie powerful big-picture identity influencers made up of our different worldviews, ideologies, belief systems, deeply held core values, and narratives. Due to their abstract and often political nature, we usually overlook them or deem them undiscussable. But that is past. Leaders can no longer ignore the formidable impact identity influencers have on how we make decisions and interact with others. When you combine sensitive identity dimensions and big-picture identity influencers, it's even more critical that leaders clearly recognize and accurately interpret the new and ever-changing lay of the land. Get it wrong, and you risk damaging your professional reputation and good standing in your industry, market, and community.
Okay, Rich.
Right. So how do we include identity differences in the conversations? And how do we create an environment where people feel safe to do so? So that's what we're going to look at. And we're going to start by putting you in a breakout now to talk about that video and your reaction to it. And there'll be questions in the chat about how does this video relate to your organization right now? And what are challenges showing up for you? And what aspects of your identity might have been activated by watching this video as we head into that conversation of identity differences. So please introduce yourself first when you get into the breakout, and then discuss the questions, and we'll come back and check in with everyone in the large group.
All right, opening breakouts.
Thank you.
Yours.
And now it's being recorded. Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Hope you had a good conversation in your breakouts. Sorry if it was interrupted. And we're going to open it up to the large group now. What we'd like to do is hear some of your thoughts and comments from your conversations in the breakouts so that we can share learnings with each other. And then we're going to segue into hearing from Armani and Kevin and some of the practices they're doing in relationship to this whole topic of how do we make this scalable, and how do you specifically target it and get people to engage. So let's hear some things from your breakout. What'd you talk about? What struck you from what you heard? What's on your mind?
This is Elizabeth, if no one else is going to go.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
It went extremely fast. So I would say we did bonding and getting to know one another, appreciate where we were on planet Earth. And then we started with question 1. And we've got some very interesting perspectives. One, the international perspective of sourcing product and services from if you're based in the United States, from outside the United States. So the identities and discussion in the video would have an additional layer of complexity because of the international perspective. And then we shared how important it is to have these otherwise taboo conversations in the virtual workplace. They are complex, but the sort of the digging below the surface, value what is seen versus, and in addition to the areas of difference that are not seen, not readily apparent, but actually are impacting us, maybe particularly so in this virtual environment. So those are a couple of things we talked about.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Others?
Mark, I'd be happy to share, like, our group dove right in and had a great discussion that I wish had gone on a little longer. A key observation was, like, inclusivity can feel like a one-way street to the dominant culture, but doesn't necessarily get reciprocated back to the folks who are trying to move the work and broaden the inclusivity picture. And that's a challenge that almost everyone who could speak up in our group referenced.
Thanks, Bill.
This is Betsy. Our group, first, we lagged in getting started. Once we got started, it was great, but then of course we got cut off. But what we talked about was picking up on something that came up before the film, which was this notion of diversity that you can see versus hidden diversity. And while we acknowledged the critical aspect of hidden diversity, we also acknowledged that as we're in the process of making this change, it is really important when you do things like have panels to make sure that they look diverse, so that you're not requiring your audience to sort of make that additional leap and say, well, I'm sure there's other diversity there. They just haven't, if you look at this panel, we know there's diversity that we can't see. And I think that's a hard thing to manage, because some of that diversity is really private. Do people want to talk about their personal relationships? What do you want people to know? Maybe there's somebody who's raising their grandchildren because they've got a child who's got substance abuse and can't do it. I mean, there's all kinds of things. But it's still really, really important to have the kind of diversity that you can see, because it's just gets faster to the discussion.
Mm-hmm. And more of a both and, that's really where that both and comes in, right? And I think Armani was mentioning that in response to what Kevin said, when she referenced when are we going to switch? And I think Armando, you said, well, we're not, we're going to broaden,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. I think that makes total sense.
Yeah, I thought so.
So is inclusion broad enough? If you go back to the video, is it broad enough to include people who are having a totally different conversation in the society? Somewhere about a quarter to a third of people in the United States are not at all supportive of diversity, inclusion, and equity. Are they a part of the conversation today? Do we need to have them become a part of the conversation? Is that a part of managing the complexity that we're dealing with?
I would say yes. That's been part of the complexity for me, because it showed some of that in the video. But when I think back to it in the best way I can explain it is if you're a part of a traditionally marginalized group, you know what it feels like to be excluded in some capacity. And so if you're on the other side and you're not in a marginalized group, a lot of the things that we're talking about from a diversity, equity, and inclusion standpoint, some individuals take that as I may end up becoming more marginalized, something is going to get taken away from me as a result of this work. And so what I like to think about is, if you know how you feel being marginalized and you don't like it, why should anybody feel that way? So the end in mind should be all of us should feel included. And so when I talk to people about that, that's the approach that I take, is that, we all want to feel included. We all want to feel like we can thrive. And this work is for everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, Kimberly.
Thanks, Kimberly.
I would say that everybody should be invited to the conversation. I mean, absolutely, that's inclusion. I don't think that you can control it. I mean, there are going to be people who don't believe in this. Some may not want to participate or may want to sabotage it. And I think those are real issues. And I think if they're going to do that, you can't, if they don't want to join, if they don't want to go with it, if they really believe it's a zero-sum game and that by participating, they are losing something, I think that you can't do anything about that. I think you try to what you can, you invite them to the table, you explain, as Kimberly was saying, your vision for what this is, and then you hope they stick around. But if they don't, I don't think you stop the process.
Well, this is
Rich, can I just lean in?
Please, yeah, I was going to say it's a nice segue into our panelists here.
I think both were spot on. The thing we have to keep our antennas up for is what Betsy had mentioned, was the sabotaging, right? We have to be intentional about driving the accountability that sabotaging is not acceptable and will not be tolerated. We will not be able to bring everyone along. However, there is a spot for everyone to be a part of what we're going through. We feel that way, and I've always put it into 3 buckets, which is why, Rich, we're continuing our learning into where we're going to go. There are going to be people that are all in. There are going to be people that are somewhat in, need to be educated a little bit, which is the power of driving education and learning based on what we're going to talk about a little bit in the learning circles. And then there's going to be individuals that are just not going to get there. I've seen individuals that I thought would never get there that have shifted to the middle, and they're coming about. They're not there yet, but they're actually engaged in the dialogue and the discussion. And that's all we can ask for. We will not, and our leaders have to go out and say this, that they will not tolerate sabotaging. And I think we got to be watchful for that.
Yeah, that's a really important point, Kevin. And what everybody's bringing up is this idea that I think about all the time as we roll out our inclusive leader summits and inclusion insights, is that it's a really hard job to convert skeptics, right? It's exhausting who wants to spend all their time doing something we know they're not really bought in. But at the same time, what Kevin was mentioning is we have to think about the implication of that to our organization. So we need leadership and policy and practices to say, okay, well, if you're not bought into the success and the belonging of our employees, then are you a good fit to be a leader here at our company, where we charge you with so many of these talent mechanisms that have real impacts to our workforce? And that's something that our leaders are learning to keep top of mind, is that inclusion is a competency that is integral to being a leader.
Will, you have a comment that you posted in chat? How about sharing it with us?
Yeah, good morning or afternoon, almost for me. I was just commenting that beyond DE&I, we've got to talk about the fixed versus growth mindset. I think that's an important part of this conversation, because, and we have a saying, you know, DE&I is not pie. A bigger piece for them does not mean a smaller piece for you. We actually need to grow the pie itself, and so converting people from fixed to growth is important. That's a good way to invite them in. Where I think the past couple of years in particular with the political rhetoric, it's done more than just show that there's differences. People have actually started attacking others just for thinking differently, and thinking differently is not something you should punish. When you do that, they just dig their heels in. We disenfranchise them more. We grow the rift. And so, just like a few people have said, we may not be able to convert them, but we sure as heck shouldn't make them enemies, because that just sabotages the whole effort going forward.
Cool. Another part of the complexity, before we shift to our panel, is that identity groups are forming social movements along with their allies, and they're approaching organizations and pushing and challenging your companies to behave in ways that they want you to behave based on their social movement's agenda. And if you're watching, some companies are struggling with that because they have constituencies across multiple identity groups. So a part of that is, and Armani, I'm going to sort of direct this towards you and then step out of it, because your organization, Amazon's, is constantly on the forefront of having an identity group be challenged or wanting to affect your business strategy. While we tend to think of things as internal D&I issues, a part of the complexity is now broadening your lens to thinking about what's happening outside of the organization with your stakeholders and how they're trying to influence your stance and your values, and that's in conflict. There are multiple groups who see the world differently trying to affect your organization. So Armani, I know you may have some thoughts about what's happening with that.
And if we could, just before we go to Armani, Lynn, you were raising your hand. I just want to make sure that gets recognized. Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I just was able to join a few moments ago, but the conversation you're having is very relevant to me. We do a ton of DEI training with large organizations. And whereas in the past, we always knew the very quiet people that didn't really participate, you know, they are among the people that disagree very, very vociferously with what we're doing. But now we're starting to see what Betsy talked about. We're starting to see efforts to sabotage. In a recent training for a large government agency, we had a gentleman start to tease someone who he thought looked gay and say other very disrespectful things to other people in the room. And fortunately, our trainer had the ability to silence this person. But then it got to a whole conversation about what should the agency do with this person. And there were no rules that had been established prior to the training. And so it turned out that they fired the guy. And there are now rules for how to, you know, it's not to diminish participation, but to make sure that if you have a different point of view, you express it with respect. And the trainer has to be very consistent at the beginning of that session as to what that respect looks like and what the consequence is if they deny
Lord.
and try to sabotage. So it's a painful lesson to learn, but we learned it, and it's going to be more and more out there as August gets close. And you know, there's all of the efforts, the identity groups for white supremacy are going to get more and more energy, and we're going to see them in our classes. So I just wanted to offer that as a painful lesson.
Thank you, Lynn. And they're going to be organized approaching organizations, federal agencies, and corporations as well. Yeah, absolutely. That's where it's headed. Yeah, Rich?
Betsy, you want to chime in?
I just had a question, actually, sort of for the group as a whole, and maybe the panel will get into this, but, and Lynn touched on this a bit with talking about what she'd gone through. Are there a sense of best practices that can be used in this that do lead to behavior change, or is it really continual conversation? I mean, I know this idea that you have to listen to people and you don't try to change their mind and all of that, but it just feels like it's a really long road. And I know it's a long road. I mean, things don't change overnight, but I'm just curious because I've been on the fringes of this. I'm relatively new to trying to plant myself directly within DEI. Are there some understandable best practices that have proven effective in having people maybe not come all the way over, but at least stop being averse to it?
I think in my experience, Betsy, there are some best practices that we really aren't gonna, not the design of this particular webinar, but I'm sure there are lots of people here, including Lynn, who has, just because you voiced that, Lynn, of experience in doing that. And she was speaking to one of them, which is really clear boundaries around what's okay and what's not in the space, which of course has to be supported from the top down.
Yeah.
So it has to be, you know, senior leadership has to provide protection and permission and process for culture change to occur. What are the boundaries within which everyone has to stay? So that's one of them. So we don't really have time to go into all that, but it's a great question. How do you do that?
And Betsy, if you'd like to reach out to me, I'd be happy to tell you what we've been doing.
And Lynn, I would like to do that. And as I recall, we've met in the past, so it's nice to see you again.
You too.
And maybe, you know, maybe Kevin and Armani could speak to that a little as our panelists, and anything else that's come up.
I was trying to figure out how to raise my hand with the tool, but I only figured out how to clap.
Yeah, that works. That works. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't want to disturb and distract Betsy and Lynn, but first of all, Lynn, I think you are spot on. You know, in our space, and let me just say this, that's the beauty of in-person versus virtual. I'm going to say that first of all. When we were in person, one of the things I used to always do and connect with our offices where we were going with training is help me understand the dynamics of the team that are going to sit in the room. I wanted to know who were the individuals that were the naysayers versus the ones that were actually on board and driving. And interesting enough, when I've spent a lot of time with Bill and others and Jim, we had a strategy about approaching the session when we knew who our audience was. And we tend to do this all the time. So I think the facilitator is key of how to address those items, and understanding who your audience is and who your participants are key. And I'm going to try to address where both Lynn and Betsy were going. We were particularly in another part of the world. And we had a participant that was a true naysayer for sure. You could feel the body language. You could feel the not participation. Bill was strategic about bringing this individual into the conversation at a manner that helped that individual be comfortable enough to participate and be respectful at the same time. But I'll make a long story short. And when we get into the fish bowls and those exercises that we do, that by the way, I love, I would do them all day. The question came out, and he was very vulnerable in regards to explaining to us how he felt what we were doing in the D&I space was preventing him from continuing his development and progress in the organization. And I try not to participate so much in the community of the discussion because I like the dialogue within our colleagues, but at times in this scenario, it caused me to come out and be a part. So I got out of my seat, I got into the inner circle, I participated as I would as a colleague, and we had some very dynamic discussions about how this journey we were taking was going to be the benefit of our organization. And we had some hardcore discussions about the challenges that we all were going to face that were not like him, and how he had the ability to kind of try to say that others were going to take something away from him. But to make a long story short, after the 2 days, this man came up to me and thanked me for the opportunity for him to participate and gave me a hug.
Wow.
Okay. I never felt so good. And Betsy, where I'm going is, our other colleagues are seeing this. Other naysayers are seeing this. They're seeing that there was a transition that happened in a mindset change, and we were going to do this for the beauty and for the best scenario for our organization. And he wasn't going to be left out. We had room for him to be a part of this. And so that, to me, is one of the basic principles of driving movement by all, by showcasing how we can actually bring others along in a very familiar, comfortable scenario.
Great, Kevin.
So that was one example in regards to bringing it all. And I tell you, being prepared for the audience, understanding who's going to be the hard pieces that you have to be challenged with, and have the right facilitation skills and individuals to drive it. If you don't, it could backfire.
Great. Thanks, Kevin. So in that context, those are great boundaries. Armani, what's your experience been around all this, or what do you have to add?
Yeah, what I have to offer to that is when we were rolling out our inclusive leader summits in our finance organization, we did get some feedback that it was very hard for some of our Black employees to go and put their experiences on display in front of their peers. So as we think about this dynamic and the psychological safety in the room where we have this minority group, yes, we want to encourage everyone to participate and share their opinion, but we also have this responsibility to do no harm. And that includes, and that's why I've been so thankful for White Men is Full Diversity Partners facilitators, because they have the ability to walk that line between advocacy and education, right? So making sure that the comments are heard and they get to educate, but also it's not putting any burden on any person in the room to stand up for themselves. Or identify any microaggressions or call out any one of their peers. That could be a tremendous tax to the participants in the room. So when we were talking about, I think it was Betsy who mentioned best practices. These are all practices all of our coworkers need to have, and there are definite hard skills around allyship, upstanding training, identifying microaggressions, inclusive leadership behaviors that move us beyond this perspective building and this new perspective and this conversation that I believe is step one, absolutely, but move us into this this realm of accountability and to practice these behaviors in context with your teams.
Thanks, Armani. Yes, and so in facilitating conversations around differences at this level, there is a lot of nuance and a lot of skill involved. So if you don't have that skill set yourself, you definitely want to have someone present who does when you're having those conversations for everything, all the reasons Armani just said. Another way to get the conversation going is to do one of this blended learning things that Mark and I are talking about today, which we want to actually show you a brief example around identity cards. So we have a process in our platform where people go in and are asked to clarify characteristics of their own identity. And when they do so, they get clarity themselves, but then it also gives them something to bring forward into conversations with their peers and colleagues. And then all you have to do is give people time to talk about these things so that they can connect across difference and then engage in getting the work done of your business more productively and in a more inclusive way. So we're gonna show you that real quickly here. So if we could just give let's just go to the inclusion insights real quick, if we could, Claire. Excuse me. So this is just when you this is just what we've got. But again, we're hoping to participate in and encourage a community of learning around this. How do we do blended learning? What have you found out? And we're just going to show you what we've discovered and what we're working on and give you an experience of it so that we can use that as part of the conversation. So this is the homepage that you go to in our model. And then you are going to, we have an inclusive team member series that you'll see on the left. These are all the different things on the left that are available. We're just going to zero in on one. And your dimensions of identity. And we're going to talk, this also lets us talk about how does personal and group identity impact how we show up with each other. So when you go into this module, there's a video that just gets you started, which we're going to skip these. It's kind of a welcome and overview.
Here are the
And
8
then
identity cards.
you're going to have the option to do identity cards. And these are the 8 identity cards that we have people walk through. And there's a list of things available under each of these cards. And we're going to look at demographic and cultural identity first and have you work on this as well. So as you can see, there's a long list of options to choose from for people to discern for themselves what are the most important things for me in determining my cultural identity. So as people go through the list, they have to wrestle with which one fits more than the other, and then we ask them to rank them so they have a sense of what's most important to you. There's another one around core values as well, and that one has a similar list, as you can see, and they're all great, of course, values, but what are the most important ones to you? Which ones define who you are today? So what we've done is Mark and I have each done these, and we're going to just show you briefly what ours look like. And then he and I are going to have a conversation briefly that demonstrates how your employees could have a conversation about this. And again, this is our version of it. You may have others, but hopefully this will spur ideas for you. So if Mark and I were to sit down at a meeting, and we would each have an identity card. This is one of the 8. And it would give us a chance now to have a conversation about this. And Mark and I, by the way, have not talked about this yet. So this is a very new conversation for us. And so it might, we're just ad-libbing here. So Mark and I are now sitting down talking about this.
It can be a conversation. We could be in a team building session. We could be in a learning circle that Kevin was talking about. We could be in any environment. So me, the things that are most important to me right now are being an African-American man in this society. Rich, I'm stressed out most of the time. I'm following the news all of the time. It's becoming more difficult for me to have conversations about inclusion in organizations when I feel like there are powerful forces that don't want me included in the larger society. So I'm very sensitive about that right now. And I'm likely, Rich, to raise it on any given occasion that I have the opportunity. I'm very sensitive about this. Age and generation is second for me because I'm an older boomer and I'm at the point where I can't do things that I used to do physically. I have some health issues. I'm in an organizational culture that has a lot of folks in their 30s and 40s, and they can go 24/7 times 2. And I have trouble keeping up with them sometimes, but I've been open with them and honest about that. And as I said, I have some physical issues going on with health now that affect me. So a lot of the attention that I may have spent at other parts of my life focused externally are now focused internally on making sure that I'm taking care of myself. I kept caretaking and status role on, although that is mostly done now. My mother had Alzheimer's, and then I had another 5 years where I was consumed with taking care of her needs and dealing with my family and my children. That was very stressful. Luckily, I was in an environment where I could share that. And then the last one is parental status. I have 2 sons. They're fine, they're great, they're wonderful young men, and I worry about them being young men of color constantly in the larger society. So if you were going to get me and work with me right now, I would want you to know that race is a very sensitive topic for me. My well-being is a very sensitive topic for me. And sometimes I get triggered very easily, Rich. And I would ask for your grace.
Of course, and thank you. Thanks for letting me know, Mark. And I feel just, yeah, I'm having a mix of feelings in listening to you. Just a lot of, my heart goes out to you, trying to imagine what that's like, because that is not my experience at all. And it's, it's real heavy to imagine what that must be like for you to carry. So thank you for bringing that to my awareness, and also helping me to understand why you may be touchy around certain things, even not around that specific topic, but just in general, because you're carrying that weight. So thank you for letting me know that. For me, it's more, I'm grew up in small towns, don't like big cities. I'm in a small town on the West Coast. That's a big part of my identity and I just, so that tends to make me a little provincial, I guess. It makes me more interested in what's happening in my town than nationally. I keep in touch with, but I'm very, I have a small focus that way. So just for you to know that. And my spirituality is really important to me. There's a real base behind all of this diversity and inclusion for me that is a much bigger purpose. I connect it to my belief structure around how humanity fits into the larger scheme of things and why it's important. And so that's that you just it'd be good for you to know that comes into the conversations for me. I don't talk about it specifically because that I need to know that someone's interested in that conversation, but that's definitely informing my approach. And then gender, is a big issue for me because my transgender nephew died when he was young. And so that makes it very personal for me, the whole issue around gender and how people hold that. And so, so that there's a lot of emotion attached to that as well. And then, what I do, this work is really defining for me. Working with diversity, equity, and inclusion is very purpose-driven for me. And I guess the physicality, the ability, just because I struggle too with health issues. And so I'm very conscious of how those go away and continue to go away. So that's always the background as well. So I guess working with me, Mark, it would be helpful for you to just know those things. And so please continue to help me understand how I can better meet your needs. And I'll apologize in advance if I don't. I want to stay conscious of that, but sometimes work gets going fast. So I can.
What I'm noticing in looking at your cartridges, and I've never thought about this, is that I don't really have visibility into one of the aspects of your identity that's the most important to you, which is where you live. I can't see that. I'm not there with you. So I can't touch the way that shows up in your life. So that's an awareness for me. And I would say I sense your sense of spirituality and faith, and I sense it in everything that you do. And I get a lot out of that. And I'm glad that you bring that, and it's at the surface of who you are. That's an important part of our relationship. So I think they get it. I think Rich and I could do this all day, but let's give you a chance to get in there and try the process for yourself. So Rich, you want to get them going?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So we're just going to focus on demographic and cultural identity cards. So what we're going to do is we're going to put up a list of examples. And right now, we'd like you to take 1 minute and just identify your top 3. So what are the top 3 that are most core to your identity? And please review the list as I'm talking and pick the top 3. And then we're going to put you into breakouts and have you talk about them together. And in the context of, how might this advance your DEI efforts in your organization if you were able to have your employees have this conversation as well. And the beauty of it, of course, is they can do it online like this. So it doesn't have to be physically present. So I'm just going to give you a moment of silence here. There's a lot of options there.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So under race and ethnicity, you've got a lot of descriptors there. If I'm clearly Caucasian and I don't really, but to me, the key issue is I am in a biracial family. And that is a big part of my identity. Where does that fit on here?
It's supposed to be there.
I put it under family background.
It could be family background. It could also be race, ethnicity, Caucasian, white, European, because even though you're in a blended family, you yourself are white, I heard you say. So that could be a way of talking about it.
Right, but I would say that for me, the salient feature is not that I am white, it's that my child is not. So my entrance point to this is the part of being in a blended family, a racially blended family. So I guess family background would be the best. Okay.
Yeah, and thank you for that. That would be a neat addition to the list.
That's a good clarification.
Of
Thank you.
choices.
Oh, there is a. Right. Armani was just, pointing out that there is a multicultural option as well, the third from the last.
Oh, I see it. I'm sorry.
For
I
that
missed
network.
it.
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. So everyone hopefully you have your top three. And so Mark, if it's okay, I'd like to put people in pairs to talk about this so we can give them longer time because people are looking for longer in the breaks. So in a moment, you'll go into pairs to talk about your top three with one another, similar to the conversation Mark and I had, where we're just trying to understand if we were to work together, what would be the important aspects of our identity that we need to know to do that. And if you want to talk about other things while you're in there, fine. And we'll try and give you more warnings before we pull you back. Okay, but we'll be back in 10 minutes. Welcome back, everyone. Hope you had a good conversation in your breakouts. So that's one. Hopefully you can, if you don't have something like that, you can take that forward. We can share more of how we fold that into our offering. But right now I want to shift over to Mark. Mark wanted to respond to something that was in the chat, and then we're going to go to Armani and Kevin, and then bring it to a wrap. So Mark, would you mind?
There was a question in the chat about the global nature and usability of the identity cards and whether some cultures would find them intrusive. There are a couple of things about that. One is the cards are in a module that is focused on self-learning. So our experience is that for people who are nervous about sharing, they still need to go through the process of sorting out who they are and how they show up, whether they share it with anyone. When it comes to the software, it aggregates the data so you can get a team look, which is very useful, and teams tend to like that. But again, if a person does not want to share their data, there is a little button and it keeps everything that they've done private. But the most important aspect of this is your own self-awareness and self-clarification around how you show up. And then I'm going to pass it to Armani for other thoughts.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. We get a lot of questions at Amazon about the global relevance of our DEI work, and we've made a ton of investments to have global DEI leaders. But we've been able to do research and sum it up into three main themes. We first identified that no matter where our employees are, they want to feel respected, valued, trusted to do important work, and informed and connected to their peers. However, they differ in three main ways. One, the identity dimensions that are most important to them and the identity dimensions that experience the most marginalization in their culture or society. Two, the point in which they are in their maturation journey and learning journey, right? So not that these things are important, but they're just not as talked about. And three, the social norm. So how you go about talking about those things. And we experienced this in some of our inclusive leader summits. We lumped a lot of Asian countries together. So that included India, Singapore, Malaysia. And what we noticed that the Indian participants were speaking most and were sharing more often. And then one anecdote that came out of that is that it's not that our Chinese and Japanese managers had nothing to say, that they just preferred to be asked about it, right? So when we would call on them, then they had tons to share and they were happy to share, but it was a difference in social norms there. So I think we can make a lot of assumptions about what's not acceptable or what is acceptable or what people feel comfortable sharing, but maybe it's also how we execute on that. So that's something that I have to offer. But we found this work to be relevant in all of the countries that we operate in. Kevin?
Yeah, thanks, Armani. Global perspective is key, and thinking about the cultures that we work in is also important. When I reflect back on the identity cards and some of the comments you were making, one of the things that we did in our new D&I action plan under our culture pillar is the education component of providing some level of education to our colleagues, with the requirement that they have to own some of their education as well in the DE&I space. And one of the things that we actually just created was a class called Inclusive Communications. We partnered with Catalyst because this is part of their platform that they have. And we wanted to make sure that, just like Rich and Mark demonstrated, having a conversation and how they could kind of connect and become to know each other, even through identity cards and other spaces, we thought having a course geared towards helping our colleagues understand how to communicate and be inclusive, and to have good intentions to drive a conversation, to develop relationships with others that don't look like you, was important. And we also said to ourselves, as a partnership with WMFDP, we went on a journey a couple of years ago in regards to courageous leadership workshops, and we felt, and some of the feedback we always got was, so what's next? And for a while, companies were going through unconscious bias training and all of that, and it was like, you do the training and you're done, and people don't really understand what to do next. And so we got together with the team at WMFDP, and you had this learning inclusive insight platform, which is amazing, and it allowed us to kind of pivot, because we went to this virtual environment. Armani, I'm sure you're going to understand this. You went to this virtual environment, you've got people across the world, around the globe, you still want to educate, you now can't do in person, and that allowed us to kind of pivot through our Courageous Leadership workshops virtually. And now we have, with working with WMFDP to help us understand how to craft this, a continuation of learning for another 6 months after we do the Courageous Leadership workshops in the Inclusion Insights platform and that learning. And then the other piece that we were talking about, Armani, if you remember, switching the dial that way, instead of the D&I team facilitating the discussions as a result of what we're learning in the Inclusion Insight platform, getting our colleagues to now be the ones facilitating and having the discussions, and allowing them to start doing the things that we want them to do, which is have those interactions and talk about identities and talk about key pieces to learn to understand each other. And we just actually finished a cohort with Learning Circle 5. We were talking about this earlier, and they actually said to me, now what's next? Kevin, give me more. And I'm sitting there saying, oh, this is wonderful, but I have to figure out what to give them now, because we had to figure out, we get to the end of the road where they're going to be engaging, and now they're yearning for more learning. And so it's just key. It has demonstrated the more you can provide education that correlates to what we're trying to do as a business to help them translate what they can do in this space, has just been amazing. So Armani, I'll switch it back to you, because I think you may, as you've been going through your journey, have a feeling about what's been working for Amazon as well.
Yeah, I get that question a lot too, Kevin, the what's next. And I said, I don't know what's next for you. What does it look like for you to apply this work to your life and your job and your role? What does that look like? Because we know, they spend so much time in the Inclusive Leader Summit, and the Inclusion Insights helps with that top of mind, that accountability, driving those best practices. But we know we don't have behavior change just after attending a training, right? There has to be some application, there has to be accountability, right? So go practice these new behaviors, go apply this new perspective that you have. That's how we're going to see the change and the connection with you and your teams, right? So they want more learning. And I'm like, I want more application. I want more accountability. I want you to go out and apply these skills. But Inclusion Insights has been great about that, sending those automatic nudges to managers to say, oh yeah, that is something I'm interested to learn about. They're short modules, they're micro learning. So if you're an organization like me, like Amazon, where they work us to the bone and time is a commodity, then those quick bite-sized exercises, those micro learning modules where you can just focus on this one thing, that one thing for the day, has been so helpful to our managers.
Thank you, Armani. Thank you, Kevin. Rich?
No, I was going to hand it over to you, Mark.
Okay. So what we tried to do is just give you a little taste of starting with the very big picture of what's happening out in the larger society, where we're all moving through and having our individual and identity group experiences, bringing it all the way down to the very personal, to be able to have a conversation that allows multiple on-ramps, from your values to your work style, to your demographic affiliations, to your geographic identity, to your personality characteristics, the holidays and celebrations that are important to you, finding ways to get people to have small conversations that share aspects of who they are, to help other people get to know them and what's most important about them, to know if you're going to collaborate and work together. So making something that seems very big and daunting, very small and personal. And what this also does is it opens up the door for finding similarities and commonalities, things that we share, because a lot of what's happening in the society right now is disunity and fragmentation. It's also wonderful to find things that we share. And sometimes the things that we share are not visible. So we gave you one experience from top to bottom. There are many more involved in the platform. And come join us. Be a part of this conversation. Help shape the work so that it meets your needs. We see ourselves as a community. We'd like to be practitioner and organizationally driven, so that the work that we create really gets used and has an impact in the larger world. And there is a way you can do that. Annie, do we have a slide that lets them know how to contact us if they want to continue or join our journey?
Yes, just a second.
Thank you. While she's finding that, I'd like to thank Armani and Kevin for the time that they contributed here today, and to our team, internal team, Annie, Claire, Jenica, and Gwendolyn, for all the work that they went through in putting this webinar together. Thanks to you too. And
thank you everyone for coming.
All of you for coming.
Yeah. Yep.
And participating, sharing your voice.
And we will keep offering these as we move forward, and maybe we'll even do one where we can just get together and share across practices. I heard that loud and clear today. So stay tuned.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care. Have a great day.
Thank you. Stay safe, everybody.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Great session.
Thank you.